self-pollination. This kind of pollination is the transference of the pollen grain from the to the stigma of the same flower, or from flower to flower, or both found on same plant. Here only one parent plant concerned to give rise to offsprings. Pollination, however, presented in unisexual flowers borne by two separate plants, and also many bisexual flowers. The under-mentioned adaptations are commonly found in flowers to achieve the self-pollination. Homogamy. Homo means same. In this condition, anther and stigma mature at the same time. Here, some of the pollen grains may reach the stigma through the agency of wind or insects, thus affecting the self-pollination. They are brought close to each other by growth, bending, folding, or to ensure the self-pollination. Here, filaments of the anther may recoil and bring the pollen grains to the stigma. In Mirabilis jalapa, means 4 o'clock plant generally we are called now. In these plants we can see very clearly. In some cases, anthers move back and touch the stigma when cross-pollination fails. In members of Malvaceae and Asteraceae we can be seen. The anthers then burst and discharge the pollen right on the stigma of the flower. In drooping flower, style is longer than the filaments, whereas in certain flowers, the reverse may be the case. Means in one plant, stigma is higher than the filaments. In some cases, filaments are higher than the style. Even though some adaptations favor the self-pollination only, then only it is called as homogamy. In some cases, sessile and subsessile anthers may lie at the narrow mouth of the corolla and stigma. Whenever pushing out through them brushes against the anther. So we can see the Ixora, gardenia and vinca. So generally we can be seen. Cleistogamy. Cleisto means closed. So some of the bisexual flowers do not open. So these type of flowers is known as cleistogamous flowers or closed flowers. Generally we can find underground plants. In such plants, pollen grains are distributed same flower of the stigma. So cleistogamous flowers are very small and inconspicuous, means cannot identify easily. They are not colored, not secrete any nectar, even scent also. This type of pollination can be found in Camellia bengalensis, Drosera, Viola, oxalis. Cross-pollination. Pollination induced by the external agents which carry the pollen grains of the one flower to another and deposit them on the stigma of another flower, the two being borne by two separate plants of the same or allied species. These agencies may be insects, bees, flies and moths, animals, birds and snails, wind and water. Allogamy is the rule in unisexual flower borne by two separate plants. In bisexual flower, they also occur generally. Nature favor the allogamy, means cross-pollination, and there are many adaptations to achieve the pollination. Entomophily. Entomo means insects. This pollination takes place by the agency of insects. It is of general occurrence in plants. Insect-loving flowers possess the various adaptations by which attract the insects and use them as a carrier for the purpose of cross-pollination. Main such adaptations are color, nectar and scent. The flowers of Asteraceae, Lamiaceae generally pollinated by the bees and butterflies. Generally, pollen grains of the entomophilous flowers are sticky. The stigma also sticky. Pollen grains, pollen grains and nectars very often used as a food material by the insects. Flowers generally attract the colors, nectar and perfume, and they visit the in search of food or shelter from sun and rain. Thus, as the insects visit the flowers, their body gets dusted with pollen grains. And when they fly and visit the other flowers, they brush against the stigma, which are being sticky, at once receive the pollen grains from their body. Thus, cross pollination is achieved. In several species of ficus, the insects enter the inflorescence chamber through a apical pore. After entering the chamber of the inflorescence, which is called as hypanthodium, so there are three types of the flowers can be seen. One is male flower which lie at the apical pore, which is lie at the bottom of the flower, female flowers, fertile female flowers, and infertile gall ficus species of the hypanthodium. The male flowers represented as the stamen, which are located at the mouth of the apical mouth of the chamber of the inflorescence, which are called as hypanthodium. A narrow passage is present. Then only this entomophily occurs. Why? Because the chamber at the apical pore, male flowers are present, no, narrow spaces. Then their insects goes at the lower side of the female fertile flowers. In between, there is some infertile flowers are there. These are which are called as gall flowers. Gall flowers are treated as a food for the insects. These are used up by the insect as a food. So there is no loss for the flower because they are infertile, means sterile, no? There is no loss. Mutual understand. They come to lay the eggs on the gall. There is mutual understanding, no loss at all for this plant. When these insects as moving through this lower side of the hypanthodium, they lay eggs, and in return they are rushes through the apical pore, which are narrow passage, which are male flowers are present in that passage, and they get dusted with the pollen grains as they are enter out of the flower and visits the another flower, and same pollen grains are into the another stigma of the any flower. As the insect moving through the passage, it gets dusted with the pollen grain. The same pollen grains with the insects may visit the another flower and shiver the pollen grains of another flower. This is about entomophily in the ficus species. In Asclepidae families, we can find the one more in entomophily. It is a best example in Calotropis. The flower of Calotropis shows Gynostesium. This is the peculiar characteristics of the Calotropis flower. Presence of Gynostesium, union between the Gynostesium and Androecium. In this flower, Androecium shows anthers in the form of pollinia. Here pentangular disc is present, which is nothing but the stigma. Here dark purple colored structure is present, that is nothing but staminal corona, and yellow colored black spot, that is that is nothing but pollinia, which stick the legs of insect carried away from one flower to other flower. Pollinia, a bag-like structure which are filled with the pollen grains, attached the attached these two thread-like structure which are called a retinoculum, and here disc will be one disc will be so these are otherwise called as cordicules also. These are whole look like a Y shaped. This is known as translator. Peculiar structure, that is Gynostesium, 5 angled platform will be when insect land on that and puts the legs at the corner of the any angle, so that pollinia will be translator will be get attached to the leg of the insect and carried away with along with the leg and will be pollinated the another flower when they visits. This is how pollination occur in Calotropis. And another interesting type of pollination which is called as allogamy by insects. An interesting aspects in the salvia. In this flower, there are two stamens will be. One is long, one is short. Long is fertile, short is sterile. And along with the stigma will be the upper lobe fertile, lower lobe sterile. That's it. This is the difference between the two anthers. The connective sphinx round. These two anthers are attached by a connective like a curved connective will be. So short anther is down, long anther is upside. With the result, uppermost lobe comes down and strike the insect in the insect back and with force and dust the pollen grains over there. Same insect would visit the another flower, pollination occurs. Means that flower get pollinated. They do not have any smell, they do not have any nectar as well. The flower is protrudes on the maturity of the stigma, bends down and touches the back of the insect and receives the pollen grains. Thus, it gets pollinated. Anemophily. In many cases, pollination occurs by the wind. Here, wind is an agent. Wind-pollinated flowers are small and inconspicuous. Means we cannot find easily. They are neither colored or not showy. Do not have any smell and they do not have any nectar as well. The pollen grains are quite light and dry and provided with wings in some cases. For example, in mountains, gymnosperms, no, that is pine tree will be, no, they have wings, no, with the help of wings they can fly and land on the stigma of other flowers. In this way, pollination occurs. The anther produces the immense quantity of pollen grains. Sometimes wind moves this side. Sometimes wrong direction means will be wasted. Some may not fall on right on the stigma. So sometimes being wasted may pollen grains means immense quantity they produce, no, transit from one flower to other flower. In case of pinus, wings are facilitated distribution of by the wind. In this way, they achieve the pollination. In wind-loving flowers, stigmas are comparatively large and protruding, sometimes feathery and branched also. In grasses, bamboo, palm, sorrel, millets, sugarcane, we can be seen. Even sedges also we can find it. The maize plant makes good example for this type of pollination. Lower part of the plant, one or two female spadices, each in the axil of leaf. surrounded by spathes. A cluster of fine, silky, long styles is seen. On maturity, anthers burst and a cloud-like, dust-like pollen grains is seen floating in the floating in the air near the plant. Pollen grains entangled by the protruding stigmas, thus pollination is affected.